Part 58. First escape attempt has failed. Junhua didn't expect to learn the secret weapon of the victory of the Holy Dynasty from the mouth of the second girl. He nodded, went back to the room in a good mood, and decided to ask Baiming Qianyu tonight to find out some specific information from him. In the evening, Baiming Qianyu returned to the palace, and Luju, who had been waiting at the door, stepped forward immediately, and said with a respectful expression, "Prince, my young master has prepared dinner," and asked the prince to move to Wang Chunxuan. Suddenly receiving an invitation from Junhua, Baiming Qianyu was not very happy, because he knew that there must be a demon when things go wrong. You must know that on weekdays, Junhua always has a cold face when he sees him, and never gives him a good look. This man suddenly invited him to share dinner, and he must have had an unhuman secret. But no matter what bad ideas Junhua played, he decided to go and meet Junhua. In the small courtyard of Wang Chunxuan, a mahogany table was temporarily placed, and the table was full of all kinds of delicacies. "Prince, you're here." Junhua changed its cold days today and politely stepped forward to greet him. Baiming Qianyu stared at Junhua suspiciously, and wanted to see from this good-looking, almost perfect face, why he was abnormal today. Junhua was a little uncomfortable stared at by Baiming Qianyu, and he hurriedly lowered his eyelids for fear of being seen, hiding a trace of panic in his eyes. "Ziqing, what's wrong with you today? Why are you suddenly so good to this prince?" Baiming Qianyu didn't guess Junhua's thoughts, and asked directly, "Prince, I thought about it carefully. I really shouldn't have ignored your good intentions before. I learned from the pain and decided to change my past mistakes and be really good to the prince." This sentence, Junhua has already practiced it hundreds of times in his heart, and as soon as he opened his mouth, he naturally had no jerky feeling, and he came when he opened his mouth. Baiming Qianyu was suddenly coaxed by Junhua to forget all the unpleasantness, and thought that Junhua was sincerely moved by himself. And he was in a good mood and sat down at the table with Junhua, looking at the table full of food, in a happy mood. "Prince, I say I'm sorry to you for my previous behavior. And I hope that Prince Haihan, don't worry about my ignorance before." Junhua raised the wine jug and poured himself a full glass of wine, and said to Baiming Qianyu, "I will punish myself with a glass. Prince, you are free." After speaking, he drank the wine in his cup in one gulp to show his sincerity. It was only after drinking the wine that he realized that the wine was bland and tasteless, as light as water compared to the spirits of the Holy Dynasty. Baiming Qianyu looked at the kiss marks looming under Junhua's collar, and his eyes were a little doting. He did not stop Junhua from drinking, but raised the wine jug to fill a glass for Junhua again. Junhua was not polite, he still preferred wine, so when he saw that the cup was full, he didn't think much about it, and drank it in one gulp. Baiming Qianyu saw him drink it, a smile rose at the corner of his mouth, and he filled a cup for Junhua. Seeing Junhua hesitate, he explained with a smile, "Isn't it all 3 cups to admit mistakes?" Junhua was right to think about it, nodded, and drank it all again. But Baiming Qianyu didn't let him go, and said, "But this prince is still a little angry. You say, how many cups should you punish yourself?" Junhua felt that Baiming Qianyu was deliberately trying to get himself drunk. But Baiming Qianyu underestimated him too much. He had the title of not getting drunk with 1,000 cups, and when he lowered his eyes to see Baiming Qianyu fill a glass for himself, he snatched the wine jug in Baiming Qianyu's hand and smiled, "Prince, it's so boring for me to drink alone. It's better to drink together." Baiming Qianyu thought that Junhua had already drunk a few glasses and should be drunk, so he nodded and pushed the cup with Junhua to change the lamp. But he really underestimated Junhua. obviously drank dozens of glasses of wine, but he still didn't show drunkenness, and talked and laughed with him. The two changed from the table to the tree in the courtyard, sat back to back on the ground, drank wine and chatted at the same time. As if the two were old friends who had known each other for many years, drinking and chatting about life. Although Junhua didn't get drunk with Baiming Qianyu, everything he wanted to know had already been set out by him. He picked up the slightly drunk Baiming Qianyu and walked towards his room. Baiming Qianyu, who returned to the room, was not polite at all, and instantly turned into a hungry wolf and pounced on Junhua. When Junhua woke up, Baiming Qianyu had long since disappeared. Knowing that he had political affairs to do, he didn't bother to ask, got up to tidy up his things. Last night, he learned from the mouth of Baiming Qianyu that the Holy Dynasty had invented something called a saddle, as long as the saddle was tied to the horse. Even if it was not a cavalryman who had been fighting on horseback for a long time, he could easily fight on horseback. I also heard that as long as you have this saddle, you can ride on the back of a running horse without holding the reins, completely free your hands, and complete all kinds of difficult attack actions on the back of the horse. I can't help but praise the wisdom of young master concubine Yi, and easily solved the danger of the Holy Dynasty's annihilation. After tidying up his clothes, he looked at the hut where he had lived for almost a month, and a trace of reluctance rose in his heart. He shook his head, ignoring the change in his heart, and turned to leave the room. Seeing Junhua going out, Luju and Liuyan immediately greeted him and asked respectfully, "Young master, what are you going to eat this morning?" "The slave will go and order the kitchen to do it. I suddenly want to drink white fungus soup." It's not that he really likes to drink white fungus soup, but because cooking white fungus wastes time. "Okay, slave maid, let's go and tell the kitchen to do it," Liuyan said briskly, and then walked out of the courtyard. "Young master, cooking white fungus is a waste of time. If the young master is hungry, the slave maid will go to the kitchen to find something else to pad the young master's stomach," Luju said on the side. Junhua had already thought of an excuse to send Luju away, but he didn't expect Luju to be so considerate and took the initiative to send it up. He nodded with a smile. "Okay. I'll trouble you. That's what a slave should do." Luju didn't doubt him, and hurriedly walked towards the kitchen. When Luju and Liuyan were gone, Junhua sighed lightly, only hoping that his departure would not affect these two girls who had no bad intentions. He glanced back at the courtyard again, then turned and decided to leave. He had already planned the route and walked straight towards the main gate of the palace, and in order to get out of the gate of the palace, he also specially applied to Baiming Qianyu yesterday. And today he wanted to go out of the palace to breathe. If Baiming Qianyu really cared about him, he should have specially informed the guards guarding the door. Seeing that he was getting closer and closer to the gate of the palace, his heart was pounding uncontrollably, like a child who had done something wrong, and he was a little flustered, afraid that he would not be able to get out of the gate of the palace. Well, the more people are afraid of something, the more they will come, and they are about to touch the door of their home. When suddenly a woman's voice comes from behind them. "Brother Shen, where are you going?" The woman's voice was beautiful, ethereal with a hint of ethereal, untouchable. Junhua cursed in a low voice, intending to ignore the woman behind him, speed up his pace, and walk straight towards the gate of the palace. "Brother Shen! Brother Shen!" The woman did not give up and chased after Junhua. Junhua knew that today's escape failed, so he held back the anger in his heart and turned to look at the woman. The woman is good-looking. Her eyes are like silk, a cherry mouth is pink and tender. Her skin is white and smooth, her posture is delicate, and a silky pink ribbon is tied around her waist, which perfectly outlines her slender waist. For the woman in front of him, Junhua had a little impression. He had seen her in the pavilion that day, but he didn't know what her name was. The woman's name is Lu Ruxian. She is the third concubine of Baiming Qianyu, and her honorific title is Mrs. Ruxian. She has a gentle smile on her face, and her voice is soft. Brother Shen, you have been in good health for a while, but you have never seen Brother Shen go to Mrs. Shui's courtyard to ask Mrs. Shui for peace. Mrs. Shui has been very angry with you recently. Junhua's forehead was bruised, and there was a burst of pain in his temples. He really wanted to turn around and leave desperately. But he knew that if he left now, he would definitely startle the snake, and when the time came, it would be even more difficult to leave. He couldn't bear the unhappiness in his heart. And a faint smile appeared on his face. I'm only a little better today, and I was just about to go to Madame Shui to say peace, but the palace was too big, and I accidentally got lost. Lu Ruxian naturally didn't believe Junhua's almost mentally retarded rhetoric, and felt a little disdainful in her heart, but she replied politely on her face. It just so happens that I am also going to Mrs. Shui's courtyard. Brother Shen, you can go with me. Junhua knew that if he didn't go to Mrs. Shui's courtyard today, he would not be able to explain why he would leave Wang Chunxuan, which would cause Luju and Liuyun's suspicion of him, and he didn't want the second girl to suspect him. So he had to politely say to Lu Ruxian, then there will be work. As for calling his sister, Junhua couldn't speak, because Lu Ruxian was several years younger than him. And it was impossible for him to call someone younger than him, sister. Lu Ruxian still had a shallow smile on her face. She nodded, and said gently, Sister, I'll lead Brother Shen to Mrs. Shui's courtyard. With that, she turned and walked towards the courtyard of Mrs. Shui. Junhua glanced back at the gate of the palace that was close at hand, sighed lightly, and followed Lu Ruxian from a distance, keeping a certain distance. I don't know how long I walked. Suddenly, Lu Ruxian, who was walking in front, paused, which made Junhua vigilant. He paused and hurriedly looked around, and found that the surroundings were quiet, and no one passed by. He took a step back, his mind racing. And he didn't know what trouble the other party wanted to trouble him. Lu Ruxian turned around and looked at Junhua with a vigilant face. A mocking smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. And then she leaned back and fell into the lake behind her. At this time, Junhua reacted to the other party's idea, looking at Lu Ruxian, who was struggling in the lake and shouting for help. He was obviously very angry, but he couldn't see death without help. If the other party was drowned, he couldn't tell even if he opened his mouth all over his body. He rushed over and was about to jump into the bitterly cold water, when two guards rushed over and jumped into the icy lake first. Junhua stood by the lake, looking at the rescued Lu Ruxian with a gloomy expression. Lu Ruxian, who was rescued, was soaked, and the cold weather made her shiver. Shen, brother, how did you? It can be like this. I'll just say to you, you need to push me into the icy. In the lake? Ah! Lu Ruxian covered her mouth and nose, looking pitiful, as if it was really Junhua who bullied her. Junhua's expression was gloomy, and he didn't explain, because whatever he said now was just a useless excuse. The two guards saw that Lu Ruxian was shivering from the cold, and hurriedly helped Lu Ruxian to walk towards the fairy pavilion. Luju and Liuyun, who got the news, hurriedly rushed to Junhua, and saw that Junhua was still in the house, and finally let go of their heart, and hurriedly stepped forward to ask Junhua, Young master, why are you here alone? The slaves and maids are worried about death. Luju's expression was still a touch of fear. It seemed that she was very afraid of Junhua escaping. Although Junhua was dissatisfied with Lu Ruxian's design to frame him, he still replied calmly, I was idle alone, so I went out for a walk. But I met the lady just now. As for what the other party's name is, Junhua doesn't know and doesn't want to know. Dare to frame him and look for death. Young master. Did you push it? Liuyan was simple-minded and asked weakly. Junhua didn't bother to explain, but Luju rolled her eyes and said, I believe the young master. The young master will not do such a thing. What's the use of believing? It has to be believed by everyone in the house to be useful. Junhua sighed lightly and walked towards his courtyard. He knew that Mrs. Shui and the others would not let him go so easily. After eating the belated breakfast, Junhua pondered whether to let Baiming Qianyu take him out of the palace, and then. No. The Leng Yi next to Baiming Qianyu is haunting, and his whereabouts are a mystery. If Leng Yi finds out that he has escaped, and tells his whereabouts to Baiming Qianyu, it will be even more difficult for him to run in the future. It's annoying, it's really a wolf in front and a tiger in the back, a dilemma. Could it be that he spent a few months in the Riyao dynasty, and waited for Baiming Qianyu to get tired of being on the run? He held his head in his hands, but he had another thing in mind. If he returns to the Holy Dynasty later, then the Holy Dynasty will have the perfect excuse to attack the Jinghe kingdom, and with the strength of the Holy Dynasty now, it is not too simple to capture the Jinghe kingdom. With such calculations, he decided to delay the way home. As soon as he stood up, ready to change places and continue to be in a daze, the maids from Mrs. Shui's courtyard hurriedly walked in, and after they saluted Junhua, who had just stood up, they lowered their heads and said respectfully, Young Master Shen, my Mrs. Shui is invited. Junhua knew that Lu Ru Xian couldn't escape from falling into the water this morning, and as Mrs. Shui, who is now temporarily in charge of the backyard, she would definitely have to try the matter, and with a sigh, he followed the two maids to Mrs. Shui's courtyard. Luju and Liuyan were very worried about Junhua, and after glancing at each other, they hurriedly followed behind Junhua. Mrs. Shui's courtyard is located in the west of the palace, and Junhua followed behind Mrs. Shui's two maids, turned left and right in the palace, and finally arrived at Mrs. Shui's courtyard after a long journey of half an hour. Walking into the courtyard of Mrs. Shui, I saw that it was full of flowers and plants, some of which were frozen to death because of the extremely cold weather last year. And the flower garden was particularly depressed. Young Master Shen, please come here, my wife is waiting for you in the main room. One of the maids politely guided Junhua towards the main house. As soon as they walked into the main room, they all focused their eyes on Junhua, and they all stared at Junhua with hidden anger, as if they were going to eat him alive. Junhua has never seen any scenes, so he is naturally not afraid of the jealous eyes of these women. He stands in place steadily, letting their eyes gouge at him, and he is not afraid. He politely clasped his fists and saluted Lady Shui on the first seat, and then stood in place, allowing everyone to look at him. Mrs. Shui's appearance is not very stunning, and her atmospheric palace dress sets off her noble and elegant, like a blooming peony, graceful and luxurious, eye-catching. In the past, he might have admired this type of woman very much, but now he can't mention the slightest appreciation, especially when the other party looks at him with scrutinizing eyes, and a trace of disgust rises in his heart. Today, Mrs. Shui called Brother Shen over. Brother Shen should know why Mrs. Shui called brother here, right? Mrs. Shui interrogated Junhua in the tone of a prisoner, which made Junhua frown lightly, and the disgust in his heart deepened. I didn't push Mrs. Ruxian into the lake. Junhua opened his mouth indifferently, looking at Lu Ru Xian, who was pretending to be weak on the side, and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. Lu Ru Xian happened to catch the sharp and warm look in Junhua's eyes, and she trembled with fright, and almost fell down without sitting still. But someone saw with their own eyes that it was you who pushed Sister Ruxian into the lake. In the face of a common enemy, Mrs. Shui must be on Lu Ruxian's side to suppress Junhua. Junhua knew that this group of people was partnering to trap him, even if he defended himself, but there was no witness, no one believed what he said, especially in this unfamiliar Wanyu palace. He took a deep breath and said indifferently, "You want to wrong me, and I have nothing to say. How can this be called wronging you? I saw you push Sister Ruxian into the lake with my own eyes." The woman sitting opposite Lu Ruxian said loudly. "Is there any evidence?" Junhua asked her rhetorically. The woman was speechless. Lu Ruxian didn't comply, and roared hoarsely, "Shen Li, you deceive people too much. You pushed me into the lake, and you still quibble, you are still not a man. Dare not do it?" Lu Ruxian took out a handkerchief, pressed the corner of her eyes that had no tears at all, and cried in a sad voice, "Sister Shui, Brother Shen is really excessive. An adult man actually bullied me, a weak woman. I'm not alive anymore." After that, she stood up and slammed into the pillar on the side, seeing that she was about to hit the pillar. Suddenly a figure like a phantom quickly rushed in from outside the door, grabbing Lu Ruxian, who wanted to hit the pillar. Everyone looked at the man in black who suddenly appeared in the main room. And they all looked stunned. Mrs. Shui, who was the first to react, looked at the secret guard next to the prince and appeared here, and her expression changed slightly. The man dressed in black grabbed Lu Ruxian's back collar with an indifferent expression, ignored Lu Ruxian's struggle, and shouted to the maid outside the door. "Someone!" The maids outside the door jumped in, and they all bowed their heads to obey the order. "Take care of Mrs. Ruxian and wait for the prince to come back." The man threw Lu Ruxian to the maids who came in like chickens. Lady Shui's eyelids jumped suddenly, and her heart was pounding with fear. But she pretended to be surprised on her face. "Shadowless guard, what's going on? Why do you want to imprison Sister Ruxian?" The man called Shadowless is one of the most loyal secret guards of Baiming Qianyu. In recent days, the prince has been letting him protect Junhua's safety in secret. Originally he didn't want to show his head, but seeing that Lu Ruxian was going to commit suicide, he was afraid of death without proof, so he couldn't be forced to show up. "Mrs. Shui." The subordinates really saw it. It was indeed Mrs. Ruxian who fell into the lake by herself. Although Wu Ying's words were polite, his expression did not show any respect. He looked at Lu Ruxian, whose little face turned pale instantly, and said in a deep voice to the group of maids in Liuyan, "Didn't you hear what I said clearly?" A few maids woke up like a dream in an instant, and half forcibly helped Mrs. Ruxian, who had no love, to leave. Compared to the shocked faces of the ladies present, Junhua's heart was pounding. He didn't expect Baiming Qianyu to send a secret guard to protect him. Fortunately, Lu Ruxian found him in trouble today. Otherwise, if he ran away today, he would definitely be arrested by the annoyed and angry Baiming Qianyu, and then tortured. Compared to his relief, the other concubines in the room all stared at Junhua with jealousy. They never expected that the prince would send his most trusted secret guard to protect Junhua. It is self-evident how favored to him is. In the evening, when Baiming Qianyu came back and learned what happened today, he was naturally angry, and directly gave a piece of white silk to Lu Ruxian, and then went straight to the wronged Junhua's room. "Ziqing, are you okay?" As soon as Baiming Qianyu came up, he picked up Junhua's clothes to check, but was pushed away by Junhua. "Thank Prince cares, I'm fine. If there is something now, it should be Lu Ruxian who has something. It's okay." Baiming Qianyu looked happy. Fortunately he was witty and sent Wu Ying to protect Junhua, otherwise Ziqing would suffer another big loss. Having said that, why is he so stupid? Who believes anyone's words? Well, suddenly thinking that Wu Ying said that Ziqing wanted to leave the palace alone this morning, he hurriedly asked, Ziqing, I heard Wu Ying say that you are going out this morning. What is Ziqing doing out of the palace so early? He was asked so suddenly, Junhua's whole body stiffened, his mind was racing quickly. And he hurriedly made an excuse, I'm too stuffy in the house and want to go out for a walk. It's okay to go out for a walk, but why don't you take someone with you? This capital city is not as chaotic as your Kongyu city, it is very chaotic, and it is safer to go out and take a few people. Baiming Qianyu was suddenly stunned, and suspicion rose in his heart. Junhua doesn't bring his subordinates, and he can still say that he is not familiar with these subordinates because he has only been in the Wanyu Palace for a short time. But why doesn't he go out and bring him to accompany Luju and Liuyan? This has to make people suspect that there is something wrong with this. Junhua saw that the suspicious look on Baiming Qianyu's face was getting heavier and heavier, and his heart trembled. He was really afraid that Baiming Qianyu would guess that he was going to escape. So he hurriedly stepped forward to hug Baiming Qianyu and took the initiative to offer a kiss. This successfully diverted the attention of Baiming Qianyu, and he turned passive into active, sticking out his tongue and wrapping his soft tongue around Junhua. Junhua smiled bitterly. When did he despise himself so much, and he was not suspected of exchanging his body? Let's go. It's not once or twice with Baiming Qianyu anyway, so why not do it again?